Hi, and welcome to our second virtual Second Thursday presentation. I'm Buddy Frank, the Interim Executive Director here at the Auto Museum. And today we're going to be talking about the Hayes Auto Collection, at least a few of our trucks we have stored at our warehouse. And your host will be Jay Hubbard, our Collections Manager. But right now we're in the museum itself with a truck from the, well, is it a car or is it a truck? You see, Ford didn't produce trucks until later on in the run of the Model T. So many companies like Smith Forma Truck made kits where you could convert it. They added frame rails that ran the entire length of the car. They changed the differential to have a gear drive, and it drove heavier tires, actually solid rubber tires to handle a higher load, and heavier springs. It still had the same 20 horsepower engine as the Model T, but with the gearing it was also very slow. Had to be slow too because you can't go very fast with the solid rubber tires. But it made your standard Model T into a one-ton farm truck, and it was very popular. Let's go out and look at some of the other trucks now with Jay Hubbard.
My name's Jay Hubbard. I'm the Automotive Collections Manager at the National Automobile Museum, the Hera Collection here in Reno, Nevada. And today we're going to take a little tour of our warehouse facility, which is currently the home to the A.W. Hayes collection of trucks. And we wanted to do a little taste of what we have stashed away in here. Standing next to me here is the 1914 Packard. This is a 1.5 ton truck. Packard and the one behind it, a Pierce Arrow, were mostly known for their luxury automobiles, high-end and classic automobiles all the way into the 1930s, and then of course Packard extending after the war. But while being a high-end, a luxury automobile maker known for its expensive, high-powered automobiles, they also had a commercial division, and both of these car companies dealt in trucks. City trucks, over highway trucks. In fact, the first transcontinental truck trip through Goodyear Tire was done with a Packard truck. Packard also delivered a lot of trucks to Europe during the Great War. This example being about a 1.5 ton model, a little 4-cylinder car, much easier, more easily to maintain and to get around inside city traffic. And now, if we want, we'll go on to the Pierce Arrow right behind it. You can get a shot of the Packard. Also note that the tires and wheels on this, wooden wheels of course, and solid rubber tires. The solid rubber tires of course were there to maintain the weight, as pneumatic tires just couldn't handle the weight that these vehicles were handled. The rubber was easier on the streets, quieter, and that sort of thing as far as downtown work. Problem with solid rubber tires is they don't dissipate heat. So when we look at the ID plate on the Pierce Arrow, you'll find where the speed is regulated down to 14 miles an hour. While this is still better than a horse and wagon, it's not as good as an automobile. But if the tires exceed too much speed for too long, they generate heat and they will literally self-destruct. Now here's our Pierce Arrow. This is a 1918 model, another 4-cylinder L-head. This truck was equipped for hauling lumber in California. As I say, they carried their brands forward from their luxury automobiles into the truck department. Now Packard also had another division which was to do with aircraft and marine engines. They liked their commercial engines. Jesse Vincent was very big on boat racing along with the Dodge brothers and several others. Over at George N. Pierce, they were just mostly interested in trying to turn a profit and generate some sort of production numbers. So this old Pierce Arrow here was again California truck, very fine restoration of solid rubber tires, 4-cylinder engine, very low speed, high torque delivery vehicle. Here we have our 1920 Winthrop Marwin. Interesting vehicle, and it is rather an unusual mark, but also because it's an early example of 4-wheel drive. This vehicle has a transfer case and axles just like a modern 4-wheel drive, except in the front you'll notice that it has a support I-beam that supports the differential for steering. The Winthrop Marwin here is another unusual piece because it is an all original, unrestored vehicle. So if you look it over, you're basically looking at near 100 years of preservation right here before you. There's a few minor modifications to the machine. I believe it was probably originally on solid tires and now has pneumatics, which was an upgrade that was done during the latter 1920s as truck tires became more and more available. But it's still carrying acetylene lights, and then the handy little place here for the gas tank right above your feet on the dashboard. This gave you the gravity you needed to fuel the carburetor and keep the machine running. It's an original overhead valve 4-cylinder Wisconsin engine, and I say the rest of the vehicle is pretty much as it was delivered, plus 100 years of wear and tear. This is our 1938 Fagel. another example of a California-built truck. The automobile industry, trucking industry during the early part of the century was very regional for shipping and marketing regions and such. So Fagel is very popular in the West Coast, all over Nevada, up through Washington, Oregon, Washington. They're a great little vehicle. They built buses, lots of commercial chassis and such all through that time. Fagel ran into hard times during the Depression and eventually ran out of money. The plant was purchased out by another corporation and basically put out of business. But a man by the name of Bill Peterman, who was a great Fagel customer, came down from Washington looking for the trucks that he had ordered for his logging business. When he found that they were basically languishing in various states of disassembly, he decided he would buy the company in order to finish his trucks. So Mr. Peterman becomes the new owner of the stripped out, gutted Fagel Works in Oakland, California. And in 1939, he builds this truck down here. And behind it, we have a 1939 Peterbilt, built by Mr. Peterman. If you look it over very closely, you'll see there's a lot of similarities between the Fagel and the Peterbilt. In fact, the entire cab and chassis assembly is basically taken right off the Fagel line. Same fitting, same handles. They've changed the drivetrain components as far as the engine concerned. Most of these vehicles are run by large gas engines. The Fagel by a Waukesha. The Peterbilt had other components and such through them. We normally consider trucks this size to be driven by diesel engines, but not so much during the 20s and 30s. And though diesel was available, it didn't have the power that they were looking for. Plus, it had this little tendency to freeze up in the wintertime. And you get stories of these vehicles with the early kerosene basically in them, turning to jello in the mornings. So therefore, your truck wouldn't operate. So it was more expedient to operate with gasoline. The innovation of Diesel 2, a thinner, more, cold weather friendly fuel, makes the diesel more popular and able to operate, and soon diesel takes over the entire heavy trucking market. This particular truck here carries the A.W. Hayes emblem from Mr. Hayes Trucking. A.W. Hayes started out as a trucker in the late 1920s. I remember speaking to him many years ago how he bought a brand new Chevrolet 6-cylinder truck, was hauling produce out of California into San Francisco. He would drive all night with a load of produce because of the cool weather. It kept the materials, his load in better shape. He would sleep waiting for the ferries and then take the ferries into San Francisco to sell his wares in the morning. As he became more prominent and obviously more prosperous, he decided to start playing with the trucks that made his fortune for him and amass the collection of trucks that we are the recipients of today. The Packard Motor Car Manufacturing Company in Minneapolis, Minnesota, builds probably our smallest entry in the Hayes Museum. It's a quarter-ton Packard truck. It's basically a small delivery vehicle. This one here is powered by a 4-cylinder, 12-horse engine, drives through a friction transmission. Those of you not familiar with those, the friction transmission was quite common in small vehicles and automobiles. We have several examples in our main collection, the Hera collection. Basically, the flywheel of your car has a wheel that is pushed up against it at 90 degrees, and that's shafted to a chain that drives your rear wheels. As you move from center outward on the flywheel, you gain more and more gear changings, or greater mechanical advantage, let me say, increasing the speed of the vehicle. Of course, if you pass through center and go to the opposite side of the wheel, now we have an infinite number of gears in reverse. Simple, gearless transmission. Unfortunately, they were subject to wear, so therefore only used on light vehicles. This particular vehicle was originally purchased by a grocer in South Dakota, and he found it wholly unacceptable for making deliveries. It was stashed in the back of the store and remained pretty much in original condition until the Hayes collection found it. Beside me is the Studebaker Coupe Express. This was Studebaker's entry in the 1940s in their medium and heavy truck field. The K series precedes this one, and this one eventually becomes the basis for the Studebaker trucks built during the war. Studebaker was another major contributor to our war effort during World War II, but they couldn't manufacture trucks in the numbers that General Motors could. So while Chevrolet and GMC handled the American and Allied troops in Europe, Studebaker trucks, the several hundred thousand that were built, were sent through Australia and India and up into the Soviet Union. So all the pictures you see of Stalin's troops hauling off into action are usually being drugged by Studebaker trucks. The Stalin's organ, his rocket launchers, everything else, modified Studebaker trucks built with Hercules engines, deuce and a half chassis, that sort of thing. 1945 rolls around, the federal government decides that we're going to allow the production of civilian trucks again. They just took the military gear off the front end of them, threw the civilian front fenders back on them, and in 1945, they're out of civilian trucks again. Studebaker built the M Series all the way through 1948 and then introduced a brand new truck body in 1949, the new R Series, which they basically carried all the way through the 1950s and in the heavy trucks into the 60s. Unfortunately, after 114 years, Studebaker finally cashed it in, was declared bankrupt, out of business, though they carried on with certain things like STP, which stands for Studebaker Technical Products. This is our 1929 Mack. This is a Model AC, better known as the Bulldog. It got its name Bulldog from the number of vehicles they shipped over to Europe during the Great War. The British loved these trucks so much that reminded them of the typical English Bulldog, and the nickname stuck. The Bulldog later becomes Mack's mascot and is featured prominently on the nose of every Mack truck sometime after the AC models. You'll note that the front of this says IM. That isn't Mack or anything. That stands for International Motor Company. The Mack brothers started as carriage builders, began the International Motor Company when they moved into gasoline-powered vehicles, and eventually changed the company's name over to Mack. Mack trucks were built in Allentown, Pennsylvania, all through the early part of the century. This particular AC is known again for its snub nose with its radiator placed in the back. This provides more protection for the radiator against impact and other damage. The truck is usually an open cab vehicle. This one has an aftermarket windshield installed, but you still have lots of fresh air to keep the driver awake and vivid. Also, you'll note on this one, it's a dual drive unit, but it's all done with chains. We didn't have differential assemblies just yet, so this gives you the chain drive, which was common on early automobiles and trucks, gives you a greater degree of gear reduction and such. Once again, these early vehicles with their solid tires would have been very slow. This one again is upgraded to pneumatics and the dual drive system to give you a little more traction and a lot more carrying capability. What you're looking at here is a steam boiler in our steam-powered truck, built by the Breeding Engineering Company in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's an experimental idea to build a very powerful truck. Steam, of course, had been driving locomotives for well over 100 years by this time. So the idea of making a truck that would be powered by steam comes almost natural. In fact, probably the first road vehicle built in the world was a steam tractor built for Napoleon to haul cannon. Little known French fact there. This breeding was developed basically after a Stanley design. So if you look at the engine, which is mounted all the way in the back of the vehicle and drives directly on the rear axle. This is your steam engine as compared to the steam boiler, which is under the hood. So we boil water in the tea kettle, we plummet back to the engine in these large pipes along the frame rails, drive the engine, which is a two-cylinder, two-stroke, basically like a four-cylinder engine because the pistons are powered in both directions in a Stanley. Drives directly on the rear axle, and the steam is brought back around through the large plumbing, back up to the front of the vehicle again to what we would call a radiator, which is actually a condenser. The steam is converted back into water and cycled back through the system again in order to extend the traveling distance of the vehicle. So it's a very strong vehicle, very powerful vehicle, no gears to shift, of course, silent to run, that sort of thing. So it should have been very good. Unfortunately, it takes a lot of energy to boil water. So steam vehicles weren't all of that, not efficient, but let's say economical. This is our McDonald 1920 model. McDonald is one of our, it's a more obscure manufacturer because they didn't build regular trucks. They built trucks that were specialty items, and this one is really special. It's a Lowboy. In a day before forklifts and other heavy lifting equipment, this thing had to be low to the ground to be able to literally slide its loads up into the bed. On the driver's side, you'll even see a capstan winch mounted on the framework that they'd use to haul loads with. Now this machine comes with a lot of modern luxuries, including hydraulic power steering, front wheel drive, air conditioning, or heating depending on what season it is. I say lots of power equipment, low to the ground, built for a special use, another California-built vehicle. The McDonald Company is specialized in just one-off, as-needed, strange little machines. Well, I guess anything but little. Well, I hope you enjoyed our little visit here at the Hayes Collection at the museum warehouse. Just some of the 42 vehicles we inherited from that collection, our heavy truck exhibit here. We'll come back another day and do some of the rest of them. Until then, we'll talk to you later.